Today, I'll share with you how I brought my own wedding to a screeching halt when I read my vows. My fiancé and I had met in a group setting through coworkers. One of our friends was a man named David. He was my best friend, so it was really nice that he got along with the girl I started dating and eventually proposed to. He quickly agreed to be my best man at the wedding. When my fiancé found out, she was really happy and said it would be perfect. I was a little suspicious of her excitement, but not enough to ask about it. After all, she was friends with him too. Well, fast forward to the week before our wedding, my soon-to-be wife Bryant was really excited and had been on her phone a lot. I assumed it was all wedding-related planning, because she'd frequently stop me in my tracks to ask what I preferred between two choices. These choices didn't really matter to me, but I'd answer just to make her happy. Now that I know what I know, I think she was making up things to ask me so that I wouldn't suspect her of communicating with another man, my best man to be specific. She and I held our bachelor and bachelorette parties on the same night. It was extremely disappointing to me when my best man called to let me know he couldn't attend the bachelor party he had planned for me. He told me his mother was unexpectedly in the hospital, and he needed to be there with her. Well, this was totally forgivable, right? How could I be so heartless as to deny or suspect him? I still had several friends with me throughout the night. I'm an active guy, so we all played basketball outside before cleaning up and heading to an upscale lounge downtown. I felt like royalty, and I hoped my fiancé was feeling the same way. We were actually already living together at this point, but we had agreed to abstain from sex for the month leading up to the wedding. I had no idea how difficult that was going to be. We took turns each night sleeping on the pull-out bed in the living room. When I arrived home that night, my fiancé was already there, crashed on our bed. She looked like an angel who had partied for the first time. I tucked her in while she slept, but as I looked around, I noticed something shiny on the floor by the edge of the bed. I picked it up and examined it closely. It was a fancy cufflink. How interesting. My mind immediately started racing. My fiancé didn't own any cufflinks, and I only had one pair, which didn't look anything like this one. That could only mean one thing. Another man had been in our bedroom. I started impulsively rubbing my face, head, and neck. This was stressful. Just then, my fiancé's phone went off. It was set to vibrate, but I could still hear it on the nightstand while she slept. I stood beside her and read her messages. The conversation that stood out to me was the one with my best man. The most recent text was from him, sent 4 hours earlier at 9 p.m. As I scrolled up, I realized she had invited him to her bachelorette party, even though that wasn't typically how these things worked. Further up was much worse. She had told him that tonight was going to be their night because the next day she would belong to me. He asked if he'd ever be able to have her again, and she replied that if he tempted her enough, he might get away with it. Messages from months ago showed how their conversation had gone from strictly friendly to flirty. He started asking about her body, and she started showing him. They had arranged to hang out one day, a day I thought she was at work. Then he messaged her, asking if they had done that, and she replied, "I've never been more sure of anything." Just like that, in the span of 1 hour, I went from a blissful man about to be married to a broken-hearted fool plotting revenge. I sent myself 6 screenshots of the worst messages they exchanged, each escalating in severity. My plan was to read those messages when I was supposed to read my vows. This was going to be terrible. Just like what she did to me was terrible. I deleted all traces of me collecting the evidence, then took some NyQuil and crashed. The next morning, she was already gone. She had left me an old-fashioned handwritten note saying she left early to get her hair and makeup done. Imagine getting all dressed up only for someone to announce that you're a cheater in front of all your friends and family. What a great day. At this point, I was only bitter. I didn't miss her or want her to be sorry. I was ready to dump her because I couldn't believe how much she had let me love her. She was my only one, and I was one of 2. I got dressed really nicely, I smelled wonderful, and my hair had never looked so good. A part of me felt like it was all for nothing, but I convinced myself it was worth it. I thought about warning my dad about what I planned to do, but I didn't want him to convince me otherwise or to warn other people. Just then, my best friend texted to ask if I was on my way to the venue. As soon as I got there, he greeted me outside. He was dressed really nicely, but the only thing I wanted to know was if he had cufflinks. Taking a gamble, I pretended to know he was missing one, even though I couldn't actually tell. He was surprised that I noticed and looked embarrassed. He said it must have gotten caught on something somewhere because he had lost it. I asked to see the one he still had up close, in case I happened to find the match. At this point, his heart was practically pounding out of his chest, and he was sweating. I was so amused by this, but played dumb. He showed me the cufflink, and it was an exact match to the one I had found and still had in my pocket. At that very moment, I looked up at him very seriously for a few agonizing seconds. I was trying to stop myself from screaming or punching him. He could see it and asked me if I was okay. I snapped myself out of it and plastered on a fake smile. I told him, "Of course, I'm okay. I'm getting married today." I slapped him so hard on the back that it made him jump. Then I just walked into the venue. After the mind-numbing mingling and grand procession, I realized I never wanted to have a traditional wedding ever again. It all seemed so stupid and meaningless. That's when my would-be wife walked down the aisle. She was as beautiful as ever, and all the memories of how we met and how long we'd been together poured into my head. It was extremely unfair, and I sobbed. People around me seemed to notice that I wasn't crying happy tears. I was devastated. I barely controlled my sobs until the moment the celebrant asked me if I'd like to read my vows. This was it. I started reading messages between James and my fiancé. I mentioned the date and time of each one. At first, it was just odd for everyone as they patiently waited for me to get to the point. But as they listened, I started reading messages that were flirty and completely inappropriate. Messages neither of them would be proud of. People began to shift uncomfortably and look around, noticing that everyone in the building was staring at them. My bride asked me what I was doing and what I was reading. After another text, she told me to stop. Then I read the really inappropriate messages, him telling her he needed to bury himself inside her again, and her telling him to come over because I had left the house. By now, everyone was talking amongst themselves, and my fiancé was trying to grab my phone from me. My best man suddenly walked out, but he was followed by 5 of my groomsmen. As she tried to grab my phone, I shouted that I had pictures and videos they'd sent each other if anyone wanted to see them. That's when people started getting up and leaving. The celebrant asked if we were still getting married, and I laughed loudly and sarcastically. My ex was now on her knees in her white dress, sobbing at the altar. Her bridesmaids had no idea what to do. They just stood there frozen. Some of them might have known she was sleeping with him, or at least seen them being flirty. It was great to see that no one rushed to her side to comfort her. I went outside to see what had become of my best man. His car was trapped between 5 men who were yelling and screaming at him in disbelief that he would betray me like this. At this point, I was done with all the drama. My head hurt. I felt like I got the revenge I wanted, and now I just needed to take a nap. I told the guys to back off and let him go, that keeping him here wasn't going to help anything. Just as they backed off, my would-be wife, Bryant, came running out of the venue. She was being chased by her bridesmaids, who shunned her and called her a terrible person. She ran behind the best man's car for about 10 yards before he saw her in the mirror and stopped. She got in, and they left. I turned around and saw that a majority of our wedding guests had witnessed what just happened. Many of them walked up to me, offering hugs and words of advice. It was weird. It felt like I was suddenly in a grief counseling session with a mix of our family and friends. Well, they weren't her friends anymore. Neither of them received support or contact from the people they once relied on and knew so well. They moved out of state together, but only lived together for 1 year after that. Bryant eventually moved back in with her disappointed and critical parents. What a gigantic waste of time. She even tried to ask me out again after all of this, and I called her crazy. I still haven't heard from my best friend, but that's fine. I couldn't be friends with him anymore anyway. My friends and family never let me give up hope or get too depressed. I haven't started dating again, but I know a good girl I'm going to ask out. It's hard to believe that someone could be with me and only me, but that's because my ex planted a seed of doubt. The only way I know how to fight this doubt is to take my time getting close to people, ask them anything I want to know, and tell them what's happened to me so they understand where I'm coming from. Wow, OP, my reaction. Not many people experience the level of stress you went through here. I love how you had the strength and determination to collect and read the messages at the wedding for all to hear. I think it was the best way for her to learn from her mistake. I'm so glad to hear that you had so much support on that day and afterward. You did not deserve to be betrayed like this by your best friend and fiancé, of all people. I enjoyed hearing your story and finding out that even though they escaped criticism together, they didn't last very long. That had to add another sting of guilt to each of them. I think, by that point, they definitely realized they had screwed up their own lives too, not just the lives of the people they held dear. It sounds like you know how to keep moving forward. Thank you so much for sharing this with us, OP. We appreciate you and your resilient emotional recovery. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Take care. Cheating Secrets Podcast.